All right, let's talk about the coup in Brazil before we talk about Zizek. So there's riots going on right now in Brazil. This is now being called a coup attempt by far right-wing forces. Obviously, there's a lot of U.S. NGOs, U.S. bank or pro-U.S. banks, arms of Western finance capital in Brazil, who are almost certainly supporting this directly or indirectly. Oops, I almost closed out of my stream here. That would have been bad. Um, and the riots so far look extremely similar to the Capitol riots that happened in the U.S. Which, of course, I did a TikTok about this. There were lots of CIA-backed groups at the Capitol riots, like the Falun Gong anti-China cult, Cuban Gusanos, people with South Vietnam flags, people with Israeli flags. So a lot of far-right extremist groups backed by the United States who then came and stormed the Capitol because they like Trump. Go figure. And now similar things are happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro, who's a very Trump-esque candidate. Very, very similar and got along well with Trump when Trump was in office in the U.S. But this is, of course, in response to Lula da Silva of the Brazilian Workers' Party, who was elected. The first time that it looked like Lula was going to beat Bolsonaro, he was arrested by a judge who Bolsonaro would later go on to appoint to a lofty, powerful position in his administration. But Lula was eventually released, ran again, defeated Bolsonaro, and now we're seeing violent reactions from the extremist right in Brazil, which we know is almost certainly backed in some ways by Western finance capital. And guess where Jair Bolsonaro is hanging out? The far right-wing president, bigoted former Brazilian politician. He fled to Miami, Florida, the hotbed for right-wing extremist exiles who are supported and backed every step of the way by the U.S. You know, if things go awry in your country, if the people get sick of your shenanigans and corruption and they kick you out, you can just go hang out in Miami, and the U.S. will welcome you with open arms. So Bolsonaro is walking around in Miami with a U.S. national soccer jersey on right now as this is going on in his country, and as his most extremist and most staunch supporters are trying to overthrow the Brazilian government that was democratically elected. So pretty crazy, but also not that surprising. And thankfully, the coup has been condemned by a lot of international leaders. Pretty much any progressive or left-leaning or explicitly socialist governments have condemned all the violence. You have AMLO in Mexico, Xiomara Castro in Honduras, which used to be, was right wing for years until Castro's election recently. You have Maduro, of course, Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso, even, who is, not a socialist. So very interesting. And like I said, very similar to the Capitol riots, which the U.S. and CNN and liberal media melted down about for months and months and months and months. They're still melting down about it when it happened in the U.S. and told us, like, thank goodness for Biden and the wonderful Democratic Party who are protecting our sacred democracy, where corporations decide 93% of the elections or 100% of the elections, but 93% of the elections are determined by the candidate who raises the most money. So what a democracy that is, where every election is determined by capital. But the U.S. loves Capitol riots when they happen in enemy states, right? They love it when an enemy state is being destabilized and violent right-wing extremists are storming the Capitol building. The U.S. is like, this is A-okay. And we're A-okay with Western arms of finance capital supporting and backing these things and trying to turn them into an actual regime change effort, which the Capitol riots were not. So I don't even know how to segue into this. I just need to show you guys this. The picture on the right is from the Capitol riots in Brazil. And the picture on the left is from the Capitol riots in America. So they literally have their own QAnon shaman. I don't even know what to say about this. I mean, Trump and Bolsonaro have always been similar figures in politics. You know, similarly right wing, anti immigrant, sort of is getting close as you can possibly be to just being openly bigoted, while still saying you're claiming to not be. And now, after both of these right wing figures are ousted, you have Capitol riots led by people wearing bullhorns, with paint all over their faces. So crazy. I can't wait to find out that U.S. NGOs and the NED are directly involved in this. So that's what's going on in Brazil. Solidarity with Lula da Silva and the Brazilian Workers' Party and all the Brazilian socialists and communists, who struggled against Bolsonaro, who continued to struggle against Bolsonaro even after Lula was arrested, after he was imprisoned. Like, I know a lot of people in the US were discouraged when the DNC and the powers that be basically rigged the election against Bernie Sanders and he lost. But like, imagine if you won the election, right? Or like you're predicted to win the election by a landslide like Lula, and then he just gets arrested. He just gets thrown in jail by this like Trump-like candidate who then wins the election and takes the judge who threw Lula in jail and puts him in a high place, well-paid position in his administration. Think how discouraging that would be for the organizers on the ground. The Brazilian people didn't get discouraged. They didn't sit around and feel bad for themselves. I should say the Brazilian socialists and organizers, they didn't feel bad for themselves. They continued to hit the streets. They continued to fight against the neoliberal far-right Bolsonaro. And now they've got Lula in power. And hopefully this coup attempt won't go anywhere. And the QAnon shaman of Brazil won't be put in power as the new leader of the country. Fingers crossed.